The storm had been raging for hours, the wind howling like a wounded beast as the waves crashed against the jagged rocks below, their frothy claws reaching up as if to drag the lighthouse itself into the abyss. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of salt and damp wood, the single flickering bulb casting long, trembling shadows across the circular room. Thomas, the new keeper, clutched his coffee mug tightly, his knuckles white as he tried to ignore the creeping unease that had settled in his chest since his arrival 3 days ago. The previous keeper had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a half-eaten meal and a journal filled with frantic, illegible scribbles. Thomas had laughed it off at first. Ghost stories were for tourists, after all. But now, as the storm intensified and the light from the tower began to flicker erratically, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He jumped as the door to the spiral staircase creaked open on its own, the sound echoing like a scream in the confined space. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling, but the only response was the low, guttural groan of the wind. The light in the tower flared to life, blinding him momentarily, and when his vision cleared, he saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the gallery, its back to him, its silhouette distorted and unnatural. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, his voice barely a whisper, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to turn, slowly, deliberately, and Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat as he realized the figure had no face, only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. He stumbled backward, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to obey. The figure tilted its head, as if studying him, and then it spoke, its voice a hollow echoing whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't have come here." The light in the tower flickered again, and when it steadied, the figure was gone, but the words lingered, hanging in the air like a curse. Thomas turned to flee, but as he reached the staircase, he froze. The symbols on the walls were glowing now, their light pulsing in time with his racing heartbeat. He felt the air grow colder, the shadows around him shifting and twisting as if alive. And then he heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing the stairs toward him. He backed away, his mind racing, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped. Thomas held his breath, his eyes fixed on the doorway, waiting, dreading what would come next. And then from the darkness below, a voice whispered his name, a voice he recognized, a voice that couldn't possibly be there, a voice that belonged to the previous keeper, the one who had vanished. Thomas took a step forward, drawn by some unseen force, and as he peered down into the darkness, he saw them, dozens of faces, pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams, reaching out to him with skeletal hands. He tried to pull away, but it was too late. The hands grabbed him, their grip like ice, and dragged him into the abyss. The lighthouse beam sweeping across a stormy, dark sea, its light now a sickly green. The waves crash violently against the rocks, and the sky is filled with swirling clouds. The lighthouse stands tall but ominous, its windows dark and lifeless. The atmosphere is haunting and final, as if the lighthouse itself is alive and watching.